Good morning everyone and most welcome to 1373 of the Heidegger series. We will continue with Stephen M. Rosen's The Strange Nature of Quantum Perception. To see a photon, one must be a photon. And I will continue on the second paragraph of page 253. By way of summarizing the paradoxical features of the Klein bottle, I refocus on the threefold disjunction implicit in the standard treatment of the bottle. Contained object containing space, uncontained subject. The contained constitutes the category of the bounded or finite. Of the immanent contents we reflect upon. Whatever they may be. These include empirical facts and their generalizations. Which may be given in the form of equations, invariances, or symmetries. 2. The containing space is the contextual boundedness, serving as the means by which reflection occurs. The uncontained or unbounded is the transcendent agent of reflection, namely the subject. It is in adhering to this classical trichotomy that the Klein bottle is conventionally deemed a topological object embedded in four-dimensional space. But the actual nature of the Klein bottle suggests otherwise. The concrete necessity of its whole indicates that, in reality, this bottle is not a mere object. Not simply enclosed in a continuum, as can be assumed of ordinary objects, and not open to the view of a subject that itself is detached, unviewed, uncontained. Instead of being contained in space, the Klein bottle may be described as containing itself. Thereby superseding the dichotomy of container and contained. Instead of being reflected upon by a subject that itself remains out of reach. We may say that the self-containing Kleinian object is self-reflexive. It flows back into the subject, thereby disclosing not a detached cogity, cogito, but the dimension of depth that constitutes the dialectical life world. Earlier, I noted the relationship between Merleau-Ponty's life world dimension of depth and quantum physical action, in parenthesis H hat, have now fleshed out that life world. Have now fleshed out that life world dimension via Kleinian topology. The physical significance of the phenomenologically constituted Klein bottle is clear. The self-containing Klein bottle embodies H hat. The quantum of action associated with the emission of radiant energy. Of photons. In point of fact, this connection is already implicit in the standard formulation of the subatomic spin denoted by H hat. Though the relationship is well disguised, the odd quantized spinning was modeled by Wolfgang Pauli via complex numbers. Maurice suggested that Pauli's spin matrices are actually based on a kind of complex number or hypernumber that goes beyond Pauli's imaginary I. The hypernumber epsilon What I demonstrated elsewhere is that the geometric counterpart of epsilon is the Klein bottle. In the form of epsilon h hat, the Klein bottle is thus seen to implicitly express the electromagnetic angular action that lies at the core of quantum mechanics. And recognizing the relationship between Kleinian depth and radiant energy prepares us to return to the question with which this essay began. Proprioceptive quantum perception. This article was inspired by recent research into the possibility that human beings can perceive single photons, and in so doing directly probe the underlying quantum reality. But as we saw at the outset, the new experiments have done no more than confirm that single photons are detectable. This is a far cry from establishing that photons can be consciously accurately and reliably perceived. Biophysical anthropologist William Bushell does observe that the aim of certain non-Western meditational practices is to significantly enhance perceptual acuity. Thus, for the specifically stated goal of the Indo-Tibetan yogic tradition is to directly perceive the minuscule, the microscopic, and beyond. Bushell speaks in general of how intensively trained individuals adepts or virtuosi of special meditational techniques appear to be potentially capable of radically enhancing their perceptual capacities to the point of directly perceiving light at the scale of single photons. Though this and other approaches designed to enhance microperception await further clarification and development. Let us proceed from the premise that observers can indeed be trained to proficiently perceive at the scale of single photons and the quantum reality associated with them. What then? our conceptual exploration has led us to the conclusion that the photon's action is best understood as a spinning akin to the action of the Kleinian depth dimension. A dimension in which subject and object, observer and observed, are themselves superposed. This is, in my point of view, incredibly important to establish. They do not exist in a suspended state before. What this suggests is that the photon could not be observed directly, while at the same time maintaining the objectifying stance of empirical tradition. It would be futile for the would-be observer of the photon to continue in the posture of a detached subject before whom objects are cast. In dealing with the depth-dimensional actuality of the photon, the observer evidently would need to enter into it with her own subjectivity. No longer could she remain a disinterested bystander. For her active presence would be required to make the observation in a concrete way. Therefore, rather than approaching the photon as an object from which she is detached. She would need to approach it phenomenologically, relating more intimately to it. Immersing herself in its life world. Here, she would become one of the visibles. And in her interaction with the photon, she would no longer sharply divide the photon seen from herself, the seer. What would such a radical change in observational posture specifically entail? We may begin to address this question by turning to the work of the philosopher of science, Evelyn Fox Keller. Dynamic objectivity. Evelyn Fox Keller calls for a new form of scientific inquiry that she names dynamic objectivity. The old approach, she says, involves a static objectivity in which the pursuit of knowledge begins with the severance of subject from object. Interesting. In contrast, dynamic objectivity aims at a form of knowledge that grants to the world around us its independent integrity, but does so in a way that remains cognizant of, indeed relies on, our connectivity with that world. Elaborating further, dynamic objectivity is a pursuit of knowledge that makes us use subjective experience Piaget calls it consciousness of self. In the interests of a more effective objectivity. Premised on continuity of self and other. It recognizes difference between self and other as an opportunity for a deeper and more articulated kinship. To this end, the scientists employs a form of attention to the natural world that is like one's ideal attention to the human world. It is a form of love. The capacity for such attention like the capacity for love and empathy requires a sense of self secure enough to tolerate both difference and continuity. This is from her 1985 paper, pages 117 to 118. Writing in the same vein, Fox-Keller adduces Ernst Schachtel's distinction between autocentric and allocentric perception. Whereas the former is dominated by need or self-interest, the latter is perception in the service of love, which wants to affirm others in their total and unique being. One which permits a fuller, more global understanding of the object in its own right. Although Fox-Keller pays scant attention to phenomenological philosophy, citing none of its leading figures, the main thrust of her presentation is much in keeping with phenomenology's central aim, as expressed in its well-known slogan, "To the things themselves." And it seems clear that the world shared by the allocentric observer and the objects that she observes parallels the life world of phenomenology. Fox-Keller helps us gain a better grasp of the new mode of scientific inquiry by offering a specific example of one of its premier practitioners, the Nobel Prize-winning biologist Barbara McClintock. In stark contrast to the detached, dispassionate attitude of the Cartesian scientist, McClintock speaks of obtaining an intimate feeling for the plants she works with. I don't feel I really know the story if I don't watch the plant all the way along. I know the plants intimately. And I find it a great pleasure to know them. Well, much interesting. A lot of interesting names turning up here as well. McClintock has turned up earlier in the series. And proprioceptive quantum perception is a possibility. Remember the red robin, one of the latest discoveries within quantum biology, especially clearly expounded in the book by Jim Al-Khalili. The red robin can perceive singular photons and use them for navigating the skies. We human beings have the potentiality to further our perception, going deeper into details and thereby grasping in quite a different manner by our own embodiment, where we are situated. This has a definite flair in the Heideggerian concept of Entwurft. We are situated in this world. Possibly on the way we have somewhere forgotten that we are in this very singular universe, to take a Smolean name. We are grounded and we have the potentiality to know this world which is ours to know. I also think that there is a deep connection to proprioception, the inner self-penetrating system that we have shown earlier is necessary. The interpenetration of the Klein bottle for perceiving the world. This is the quantum action, and we could more dwell into that in our everyday experience, making it deeper, more encompassing, more telling, opening up for a greater, more nourishing understanding. Keller is using the word love. Of course, that brings to the surface the Heideggerian Sorge. I think Martin Heidegger had an intuitive grasp of quantum perception and realized that the world is an action, a participatory action, including us and the world. We are not passive bystanders. We are already, always actively engaged in the world. If we acquire the neutral, dispassionate attitude, possibly with the bodily attitude that comes with that neutral voice, gaze, corporal stance of the theatrical spectator, we will lose out. We will make ourselves smaller, less understanding. Maybe there is a question here from my dear colleague. Give you light and
hello. Thank you for this presentation of Rosen's paper. The research of Barbara McClintock on chromosomes and how to treat plants lovingly reminds me of the Japanese scientist Masaru Emoto, who wrote a bestseller, Hidden Messages in Water. Is about water consciousness. So Barbara McClintock studied plants and Masaru Emoto studied water, and the conclusions are similar. So if you treat so-called objects lovingly, you will get better results. And it's so easy that we forget about water and plants and treat them as like other things. But I suppose also I could probably you could also say, Hans, that if I treat it lovingly, it will give better coffee.
yeah.
And yes, it was very enlightening. We should perhaps take up also Barbara McClintock. Have you? Yeah, yes, we should. When we eat, we should not rush to take the food in our mouth, but to actually have a loving thought before we taste, or as what is the name was of the brain researcher who said that we should smell the things first and take in. Let me think. Let me think. What was his name again? We discussed him earlier. Let me think now if I can get the name of this talented scholar. Let me see. He publishes videos every Monday.
Dr. Huberman.
Huberman, thank you, Huberman. Thank you. Do you want to add something, Hans? Andrew Huberman.
Yeah, Rosen is here excellent in putting the different viewpoints in sharp contradistinction and thereby making understanding easier, and that it is an attitude towards the elements that sort of haunts us, or it is a spectre, as we said the other day. It is something that makes our own being less real. We go into das Man, we become phantasms flying about in unreality. And both our inner, our endogenous reality and the exogenous reality become less complex, less enticing, and less beautiful. Until the 20s or 30s, people who went into the career as physicists had a much keener interest in the beauty of nature. And what happened since the neutral idea, the dispassionate, took over, maybe people like myself, a humble engineer, the mechanical guys, and no longer this loving character of approaching the world, instead taking it apart, isolate it from the world, giving it no breathing space, and taking away the container makes for a stark, lifeless world, often depicted by some of the new era scientists, Jacques Monod and Steven Weinberg, Carl Sagan, not to be forgotten. They always picture out this grotesquely inhuman universe, cold like a desert at night, lifeless. And in the biologists, which are the most sternest adherents of this static idea, even life is lifeless, undirected, not living, directed. It's dead matter, randomly assembled, going nowhere, in a system that is determinate from the outside somewhere. Yes, there is a lie in that system. And Stephen Rosen is also pointing to the deceptive character of the classical formula, where odd things can happen and we can see ourselves from the outside. I would say that outside vision is an attenuated, diluted, derived conception. It gives some little, but in comparison to quantum perception, it is very, very poor. It's not really giving. The yogic tradition, yeah, it's time to get back to that. Put a pause here. So we got ourselves a cappuccino each. Yes, the cup of joe. And I was just mentioning that Rosen needs a slow read. It is also quite a different attitude in understanding Rosen. These things take for, I would say, old age, safe, slow, non-stressed conceptuality. We have mentioned before in connection with Joe Dispenza and also Susie Froebel that a slower understanding, if you go down to the delta waves or theta waves, that is much more complex. It's deeper and it's expanded as well. We usually talk about the modern day consciousness as almost like the mechanical view of the world, point-like. This is one of the things that Rosen is pointing out here, is that with our modern worldview comes a different attention. An attention that does not in the beginning allow for the understanding of deeper things. It is too stressed, it's in the left, repetitive, monotonous understanding where we want to only redefine or rename things. Sorry for that rather long introduction. I will continue where I left off, page 256. And I was just about to read the quote by McClintock. It was this kind of knowledge that enabled McClintock to identify plant chromosomes with greater clarity. A quote from her, recorded, written down by Fox Keller. I found that the more I worked with them, the bigger and bigger the chromosomes got. And when I was really working with them, I was not outside. I was down there. I was part of the system. As you look at these things, they become part of you and you forget yourself. Fox Keller observes that McClintock's vocabulary is consistently a vocabulary of affection, of kinship, of empathy. An empathy that constitutes the highest form of love. Love that allows for intimacy without the annihilation of difference. Here the word love is used, neither loosely nor sentimentally, but out of fidelity to the language. McClintock herself uses to describe a form of attention, indeed a form of thought. Fox Keller arrives at these conclusions. The crucial point for us is that McClintock can risk the suspension of boundaries between subject and object without jeopardy to science, precisely because To her, science is not premised on that division. Indeed, the intimacy she experiences with the objects she studies is a wellspring of her powers as a scientist. In this world of difference, division is relinquished without generating chaos. Self and other, mind and nature survive not in mutual alienation, or in symbiotic fusion, but in structural integrity. McClintock's world of feeling and embodied empathy bears kinship with the depth-dimensional life world of phenomenology. It is a world in which the dialectic of difference and identity is enacted through an intimate knowledge of other that requires and is inseparable from the knowledge of self. McClintock's revolution that will reorganize the way we do scientific research. Depends on relaxing our commitment to the classical ideal of object in space before subject, and descending from the Cartesian stratosphere to immerse ourselves in a world where object and subject mediate on one another internally in an encompassing circular flow. This, my comment, is the interpenetration of the Klein bottle of space itself. Excuse me. Of course, while McClintock studied chromosomes, the central concern of the present paper is with photons. Unlike the photon, the chromosome is not a native of the quantum domain. And although McClintock cultivated a uniquely intimate relationship with a molecular structure, other biological researchers have been able to strike a more dispassionate, conventional posture, treating chromosomes as objects from which these researchers are largely detached. Whereas the chromosome does allow for such treatment, the single photon does not. To sharpen our understanding of why this is so, let us take a closer look at the photon. The phenomenon of light. Modern physics is a child of the electromagnetic age. Two of its greatest experiments centered on the phenomenon of light. The results of Planck's experiment on black body radiation provided the impetus for quantum mechanics, and an earlier experiment on light conducted by Michelson and Morley in 1887 created a puzzling problem subsequently addressed in Einstein's 1905 theory of relativity. The Michelson-Morley research raised doubts about the luminiferous ether that Maxwell had imagined to be the medium for propagating electromagnetic energy. Just as relatively crude mechanical phenomena like water waves and sound waves could be taken as transmitted through Newtonian space via the medium of water and air. Maxwell supposed that the subtler electromagnetic energy he was investigated was transmitted through the ether. A highly refined medium thought to pervade the whole universe. Possessing few properties and no action of its own. The ether was presumed to serve exclusively as the framework within which the continuous motions of coarser substances could be measured and analyzed. Including the motion of light. Maxwell's ether hypothesis reflected the underlying idea that light could be viewed as a mechanical force that passed through the Newtonian continuum like any other force. In other words, that light could be treated as an object in space that could be observed objectively by a Newtonian subject detached from that space. In so postulating, the existence of a luminiferous ether, the old formula of object in space before subject was tacitly maintained. But the postulate proved untenable. If it were true that light moved through a motionless ethereal continuum, then a key principle of classical mechanics should apply. The addition of velocities. Assuming light to propagate through the ether at the absolute speed of c, 300,000 kilometers per second. A traveler moving toward a beam of light should observe the beam to be approaching her at a velocity greater than c. The observer's velocity now being subtracted from c. What Michelson and Morley discovered was that the velocity of light actually always appeared to be the same, regardless of its direction of motion relative to the observer. This astonishing result sounded the death knell to the ether theory. In the most important year of 1887, I add. The result of the Michelson-Morley experiment was indeed baffling to the classical eye. It is not an obvious fact of perception that if I change my perspective, I change my perspective on an object I am viewing, its appearance will change accordingly. What the experiment demonstrated in its abstract way was that when the object being considered is light, the familiar principle of perspective does not apply. It would certainly look strange to me if I got up from this computer screen I'm sitting at, moved all the way to the right of it so that I was viewing the screen at an acute angle. But found that the screen had the same full square appearance as when I was sitting directly in front of it. Analogously, this is what Michelson and Morley saw when they located at light from different angles, reference frames. This strange outcome made it clear that the phenomenon of light does not behave the way mechanical phenomena do. Thus suggesting that electromagnetic phenomena are not strictly governed by the classical laws of Newtonian space. I think you get a little feeling, my comment here, how entirely fiendishly outwardly this distinction is. But just why was it that the velocity of light did not change, regardless of the frame of reference that Michelson and Morley adopted? Why did light look the same to them, no matter what perspective upon it was they assumed? I propose it was because, in confronting the phenomenon of light, they were not encountering an object to be seen, but that by which they saw. In this regard, cosmologist Arthur Young commented that while the conventional scientist likes to think of a particle of light as just another particle, light is not an objective thing that can be investigated as can an ordinary object. Light is not seen, it is the seeing. The physicist Mendel Sachs reached a similar conclusion in his inquiry into the meaning of light. What is it that propagates from an emitter of light, such as the sun, to an absorber of light? Such as one's eye. Is it truly a thing on its own? Or is it the manifestation of the coupling of an emitter to an absorber? Sachs' rhetorical question intimates that light, instead of lending itself to being treated as an object open to the scrutiny of a subject that stands apart from it, must be understood as entailing the inseparable blending of object and subject. This computer screen surely does not look the same to me from every perspective. but in attempting to observe the light by which the screen is perceived. It seems I would be confronted with the prospect of viewing my own viewing. And this would mean that I would not encounter the concrete variations in appearance that attend the observation of an object from a viewpoint that itself is not viewed. This is pivotal writing by Rosen. You should copy this and leave it on the refrigerator door and ponder it every day. It is very, very important. At bottom then, the finding of Michelson and Morley evidently called into question the classical intuition of object, space, and subject that had implicitly governed the work of science for many centuries. Interestingly, the topic of light plays a significant role in ontological phenomenology. We might say that Merleau-Ponty's study of Cézanne's auto-figurative art essentially studies the paradox of light. Heidegger, for his part, is quite explicit about the importance of light to phenomenological thought. After acknowledging the contributions of Hegel and Husserl in surpassing the old mechanistic objectivism and making subjectivity the matter of philosophy, Heidegger comments that in thinking subjectivity into its own, to its ultimate originary givenness, to its own presence, something remains unthought. Quote from Heidegger. What remains unthought in the matter of philosophy? As well as in its method. Hegel's speculative dialectic is a mode in which the matter of philosophy, i.e. subjectivity, comes to appear of itself and of itself, and thus becomes present. Such appearance necessarily occurs in some light. Only by virtue of light, that is, through brightness, can what shines show itself, that is, radiate. End of quote. Evidently then, what remains unthought in the history of philosophy is the phenomenon of light. Or what Heidegger later calls energia. That which in itself and of itself radiates and brings itself to light. It is clear that for Heidegger, energia or light is not merely a local, objectively observable phenomenon, not just a finite, particular being. Heidegger implicitly associates light with being. With presence as such, rather than just with what is present. I think it would be time for a little summary. How far are we into the lecture?
1 hour and 49, so we have to stop there, I think.
So most clearly, once more repeated, we understand that we are participating even in light. Far from the idea of light being out there, the idea that it illuminates the world and then that light solely hits the retina to give a picture of the world is significantly downcast by Morrison and Morley. We are in light. We are light. We direct ourselves outwardly, but at the very same time inwardly. I come here to think also of Ian McGilchrist when he says the classical formula or the old paradigm is an attitude, it is a posture. I was reading a bit yesterday night how this posture look. It is not calm. It is a posture that constantly threats what it sees. It's grasping. It is anxious. I would say it's fear itself. There is fear at bottom of the grasping. A parable or metaphor I come across many years ago was being in the ocean, or even worse, submerged in the ocean, thousands of miles from the coast. You don't know what is up, you don't know what is down. And no matter how hard you try to grasp, more water will come and not give you the directions you desperately need. Where are those directions? Those directions are within yourself. You are an active participant in the understanding. By neglecting that, you will block understanding, as proven in 1887. We are in the world cooperatively constructing the world, and this is what makes it real. My posture, my demeanor is what makes it possible for an understanding to come. The stressed posture of the left hemisphere in itself blocks the light from telling us the way. We will not come to an understanding. The modern crumbled up posture with tensions is what constructs the world, and a tensed I, a tensed observer, will construct the classical formula with it with its randomness. And when you don't receive knowledge, think about the ocean once more. You will start to grasp, trample water, and become more desperate. That is the fate of modern man. Our very stressful attitude of anxiously wanting to directly grasp is exactly what stops understanding. And as long as we remain in a locked down bodily posture, our part of the light will not come to us. Understanding will be blocked. This is one of the reasons why reading slowly, and going down in pace is essential for understanding, because there is no way of understanding this with empty concepts. Before the video shuts off here, I can see that my colleague Kalle is anxious to say something.
Hello.
Let me give you some light first.
Thank you. I want to summarize my understanding of the Michel-Morley experiment from 1887, and this insight I have gained from Rosen, this 2021 paper, but also from his book Dimensions of Apeiron from 2004 that we have gone through earlier. So, and thanks also to Johannes, who has explained all these deep things from Rosen. So my understanding is now, okay, so the first point is important, is that we speak in Einsteinian way that there is no relativity. There are no absolute truths, everything is relative. So it's almost a philosophy of life. Everything is relative. Okay, everything is perhaps relative, but we have to add light is not relative. Light is not relative, so there is an exception to the rule. Because light is, but I could demonstrate it with this. So when we think that the light has an origin, this it comes to me, and I could compare it with New Testament studies, with people want to find the origin, what is the original manuscript. And I think that is an error of judgment, because we think that is here, the origin is here. But that is a mistake in perception. It is instantaneous, there is no origin, so to say. All we want to have origins, we are really two origins. What are these two origins? They're my eyes and this light bulb here. So I could say that no matter which direction light traveled, it always moved at the same speed. And Rosen quotes Arthur Young, who said, light is not to be seen. It is the seeing that is a participle that we have spoken about this week. So participle is important. Heidegger emphasized participle, so the importance of participle. So light is seeing, and to make reference to a homonym that we used earlier, that Rosen used earlier, namely the pronoun I and the noun I. And this homonym, I, the pronoun, and this noun I, makes the distinction collapse between the subject, that is me in this case, and the thing observed, that is the light bulb. I think this homonyms are great in this case, because it illustrates it's impossible to separate between the observed and the observer. And I have in the past spoken, I am much for the favor of the thought that there is always two origins. Also when it comes to, let's say, to New Testament manuscripts, people speak about only one origin. I would like to speak about two origins. And we can illustrate in this case with the light bulb, so with the homonym I. Hans, would you want to add something about to my reflections?
Yes, it's very good, because even in this interpretation, the classical formula is still the way to understand these things, and people are looking for original manuscripts and original quotes. So they are deeply following the Cartesian Newtonian formula of object in space in front of subject, where the subject is taken away and all the light is only unidirectional at the object, and therefore they do not understand original. For there to be an original, the seer or the eye will have to be there in full presence. By taking one side away, they lose the possibility of being fully present. So they need to pin it down aggressively, hard, and thereby the more you grasp, the less meaning you get, because this is not an original of the world. It is transcendental, subjective. It is, as Ludwig Wittgenstein says, we are hypnotized by an idol, an image, and that we are separated. In knowing, as Kalle mentioned here, in presencing in the world, we are trying not to be here by looking too hard at the origin, forgetting our own posture, becoming literally cramped, because it goes with the posture. If you sit like this, you will start looking for a monosemic origin, whether it's the atom or whether it's the original text. It is still not taking the interpenetrative self into the equation, and therefore it gets superficial, not having the meaning of the world as it is, not being in the world Einwurft, as Heidegger would have it, but instead escaping one's own real embodiment. Very good, thank you very much, Kalle, and thank you for listening. Have a very pleasant morning, I think it is. Bye bye.
Thank you.